Selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors (NRIs). The first truly selective non-adrenergic reuptake inhibitor to be marketed in Europe and other countries was reboxetine, and the first in the US was atomoxetine. Both lack the additional and undesirable binding properties of the tricyclics. But reboxetine testing in the US suggested inconsistent efficacy in major depression with the possibility of being less effective than SSRIs. And atomoxetine was never developed as an antidepressant but is marketed for the treatment of ADHD. But as stated previously, NET inhibition not only raises NE but also raises DA levels in prefrontal cortex. And as expected, higher degree of NET occupancy of selective NET inhibitors may be necessary for optimal efficacy for either depression or ADHD if there is no simultaneous SERT or DAT inhibition. Interestingly, high degree of selective NET inhibition, although often activating, can also be sedating in some patients. This might be due to overtuning noradrenergic input to cortical pyramidal neurons. A new selective NET inhibitor, sometimes also called NERI, is adivoxetine, is in testing as an augmenting agent to SSRIs in depression. Depression can alter circadian rhythm, causing a phase delay in sleep-wake cycle, the degree of which correlates with the severity of depression. Agomelatine. Numerous other physiological measurements of this rhythm are also altered, such as flattening of the daily body temperature cycle, elevation of cortisol secretion throughout the day, reduction of melatonin secretion that peaks at night, and reduction of BDNF and neurogenesis that also peaks at night. It is even possible that depression is due to this broken circadian clock. Interestingly, numerous genes operate in a circadian manner, sensitive to light-dark rhythms, and are called clock genes. The abnormalities in these clock genes have been linked to mood disorders. Melatonergic actions combined with monoaminergic actions can resynchronize this rhythm in depression, essentially fixing the broken clock and thereby exerting an antidepressant effect. Agomelatine has agonist actions at MT1 and MT2 receptors and antagonistic actions at 5-HT2C receptors. Normally, serotonin binding at 5-HT2C receptors at GABA interneurons in the midbrain inhibits both norepinephrine and dopamine release in the prefrontal cortex. But when 5-HT2C antagonists such as agomelatine binds to 5-HT2C receptors on GABA interneurons, it prevents serotonin from binding there and thus prevents inhibition of norepinephrine and dopamine release in the prefrontal cortex. In other words, it disinhibits their release. 5-HT2C antagonistic actions are, as mentioned, is a property of antidepressant fluoxetine and metrazepine and the atypical antipsychotics with antidepressant actions such as quetiapine and olanzapine. 5-HT2C receptors are not only located in the midbrain raphe and prefrontal cortex where they regulate the release of dopamine and norepinephrine, they are also localized in the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus, the so-called brain space maker where they interact with melatonin receptors. When light enters through the eye, it is translated via the retinohypothalamic tract to SCN within the hypothalamus. The HCN in turn signals the pineal gland to turn off melatonin production. And in reverse, darkness signals the pineal gland to produce melatonin. Melatonin in turn can act on the SCN to reset circadian rhythms. Both melatonin and 5-HT2C receptors fluctuate in a circadian manner, with high receptor expression at night or dark and low receptor expression in the day or light. In depression, however, circadian rhythms are out of sync, including low melatonin secretion at night. Agomelatine, by stimulating melatonin receptors in SCN and simultaneously blocking 5-HT2C receptors there as well, appear to resynchronize circadian rhythms. The combination of 5-HT2C antagonism plus MT1 and T2 agonism creates numerous biological effects that are not triggered by either mechanism alone, namely enhancing neurogenesis and BDNF, resetting sleep-wake and dark light phases, decreasing stress-induced glutamate release, regulating downstream signal transduction cascades and clock genes, resynchronizing circadian rhythms, and more critically, antidepressant actions.